Well, let's get some clarity now on the ANC's position, and we're joined by the party's Head of International Relations Subcommittee, Nomvula Mokonyane. Ms. Mokonyane, thank you very much for your time. Just based on the story we've played, is it fair to conclude that, indeed, South Africans have been confused, both by government and the governing party?
Good morning, good morning, Oli, and morning to your viewers. The ANC at its 55th National Conference rescinded the decision of pulling out of the ICC. So that resolution still stands. In our last discussions at the ANC Lekgotla, including in the last NAC we've had over this weekend, one of the things that has been looked at is we need to look at the amendment of the resolution of 2002 that is domesticated, related to the Roman Statute. That then gives South Africa an opportunity of not making that statute mandatory in terms of implementation to our own situation based on national interest. There's an experience of what has happened in the United Kingdom. There is also an option of us entering into a bilateral arrangement with a country that we have an interest in terms of relating to. So the NEC has assigned ANC deployees to go and look at various options that may actually help the African National Congress and the country in realizing our own national interests with regard to many things, including, amongst others, the hosting of the coming BRICS summit.
Okay. You are very clear that the party's conference resolutions that were taken in December last year is that South Africa should remain within the ICC. The NEC is discussing, or has discussed at this weekend, and the President also making this announcement on the occasion of the visit of the Finland President, is that the South Africa must pull out of the ICC. What is pushing, or what has pushed the ANC to renege on its resolutions that was taken in December?
The ideal would have been to consider that, but the reality is different. Remember, we had an aborted process that was almost 2 years in the process, and it then got affected by the conference that resolved that we must rescind on our decision to pull out. So what do we do? One of the things that we have looked at are the issues that come from Amnesty International, experiences of other countries on how they deal with these issues. One of our own issues as South Africa is that we adopted an act of 2002 that then restrains us on opting for creation of immunity for anyone who comes into our country with a warrant from the ICC. So what the ANC is saying is that let's amend the South African Implementation Act so that then for whatever an eventuality we are able to apply means that are for the good of our country and for the good of the relationships that we have. It is not about saying we are pulling out. That will be an option that have to be considered going forward. But the immediate thing is that we have tied our hands because we have what we call the Implementation Act of 2002, which is that was saying, let's look at it, let's go to Parliament, let's look at the amendment of that act, let's look at possibilities of entering into bilateral relationships with the various parties and so on and so forth. And that's why there is now a statement that was issued by the African National Congress and also affirmed. Actually, the South African government, through the Presidency, has confirmed what the ANC's position is.
Ms. Mokonyane, I think that we are getting ourselves confused even more. Let me try and put some context here. In 2017, the government of South Africa went straight to the International Criminal Court to say that we are pulling out. A decision made by a court in that same year of 2017, said that this was a clumsy process by the government because you have failed to go to Parliament first, and instead you went straight to the International Criminal Court. And so, part of that decision was because of the Omar al-Bashir matter, which the government failed to arrest when he was in South Africa. You are now, again, getting into another state of confusion because there is a matter of the Russian president who has an arrest warrant, much like al-Bashir. And now you are involved in yet another chaotic process in order to try and pull out of the ICC.
In fact, Toli, that court decision directs the South African government to go through the parliamentary process. And that is exactly that opening that we are considering through our own public representatives, that let's look at the amendment of our own Act of 2002 so that we amend it and it creates space for South Africa to apply any means of creating a buffer between what is a Roman statute and what is of our national interest. As it has happened in the United Kingdom with Pinochet, where the United Kingdom was able to grant immunity because of that relationship and the bilateral agreement that has been reached. What is unfortunate and is a reality is that the last conference took a resolution. We have to stick to that resolution and even in its entirety deal with what that conference said, that we then need to look at all these commitments that we have pushed South Africa to enter into that end up affecting our own national interests, like in this instance. We all are looking forward to hosting BRICS. I think there's an interest on having all our guests, once they're invited, to be here in South Africa. And moving forward, we will then have to look at how then do we contribute in the transformation of some of these institutions, but also making the United Nations Security Council and all other bodies of the UN to become the bodies that must deal with issues of peace and stability.
All right, so what you're explaining in simple words is that the government, including its party that it answers to, it's clear that this latest decision to want to pull out of the ICC is prompted by the anticipated visit of the Russian president, who has an arrest warrant on his head. Does government or has government explained to the NEC this past weekend how it plans to handle that?
You know, we also are going to be hosting a meeting of BRICS parties as the ANC. So we have a direct interest. We have a direct interest on behalf of the people of South Africa to host a summit and many other international platforms in our country that may not be affected by such actions as what the ICC has actually resolved. It is in our view that we rather deal with what is within our own control, and what is in our own control, it's this South African Implementation Act. It is that act that we need to amend whilst we continue being in that ICC and advocating for its transformation, ensuring that all other parties...
My question is, as things stand, South Africa is a member of the ICC. Pulling out of the ICC,
in the immediate, is impossible.
It's impossible. That will take about 12 months.
Yes, it's impossible.
All right. So
there is another avenue, and that avenue is an avenue that needs to be explored, and it has to do with our own, as also as indicated by the court during the al-Bashir case, that you then have to deal with your own domesticated Act of 2002.
And so what is the solution? Is it that President Putin does not come to South Africa? Has that discussion been had with the Russian authorities?
We will never even take such a resolution. We'll look at inviting our guests and ensure that all BRICS countries do attend, and we create an enabling environment. And part of that enabling environment is that parliamentary process that we will have to consider and make our public representatives to deal with it. And that can then create a better platform of ensuring that our national interests and the interests of the Russian people and any other guest expected is guaranteed.
Ms. Mokonyane, we are merely a few months away from August. That's when this BRICS summit is going to take place. You are obligated as South Africa to arrest the Russian president if he sets foot here. So what is the solution in the interim?
We are also obligated to consider what was presented by the courts and use that opening to create an environment that can ensure that South Africa does host and is not seen to have contravened any law. And going forward, we must all again work together in dealing with the transformation of some of these multilateral institutions that also do not necessarily act in a manner that is seen to be fair.
29 years into democracy, how would you define South Africa's foreign policy approach?
We remain committed to a peaceful as well as a harmonious coexistence of nations. We believe in dialogue. We don't believe in resolution of any conflict through the use of arms. Our own experience tells, and hence we continue to call on the people of Sudan to go back and negotiate and ensure that there's a civilian-led government. That's why we're talking about the issues of Palestine, that there is a need for dialogue. Even the NATO-sponsored conflict of Ukraine and Russia, we do believe that there is a need for dialogue, and hence we remain actively non-aligned. What do we mean by being actively non-aligned? We continue to hold bilaterals with all parties. We continue to make influence of the multilateral institutions to play their own role, so that then there is no bigger brother out there who assumes that they can actually not be signatories to some of the resolutions and act on their own to cause harm and injustice. We continue to call for a peaceful democratic process in Eswatini, and urging that democracy should prevail in Eswatini, Sahrawi, and the conditions of the people of Sahrawi. So ours is about it's about peace, it's about human rights, and it's about justice and peaceful coexistence.
If it is about human rights, does South Africa agree then that Russia is the aggressor in the Ukraine situation?
We do not even want to say who is the aggressor. We believe that NATO itself, in its conduct, would have helped without actually moving to where we are here today. We do not believe that the blame should be put on Russia. They also have their own national interests that they had to protect, and hence our call that these matters do require a dialogue and peaceful coexistence of nations that have been existing peacefully. And the fluidity of the situation does call on everybody who subscribes to peace, to justice, to actually refuse to take sides, but to call for a peaceful interaction and an intervention by the United Nations.
If indeed South Africa is for human rights, then I think we are at a situation where South Africa, in fact I should put this to you as a question, is South Africa bending over backwards on its standing on the international community simply to accommodate Russia, which has invaded Ukraine, which has been said to be a sovereign country? Is South Africa bending over backwards in order to accommodate Russia and its president? If so, what is South Africa extracting from Russia in terms of just trade relations? Do we know where we stand in terms of those bilateral ties?
That's why we keep saying we remain non-aligned. We're looking at what is good for every nation. And in this instance, we do believe that the best for both nations is to come back and negotiate and have the United Nations Security Council playing a very meaningful role in this regard. Secondly, we do believe that what we are doing for us, remember we are part of BRICS, in this situation we would want to have a BRICS summit that has got all parties participating. Once invitations have been issued and once there is a response, there shouldn't be any obstacle or a challenge either for South Africa or for those countries or nations that would be coming to our country. We must still, again, as a nation, call on all nations and all other institutions and agencies to opt for peace, to opt for dialogue, and not consider any conflict to be resolved in the manner that we see happening between Ukraine and Russia. Remember, these are nations that have coexisted. These are nations that were together under the Soviet Union before. And to move into the space, of course, Russia itself found itself in a situation where it had to defend its territory. And unfortunately, in defending its own territory, Ukraine people become casualties of a situation that has got nothing to do with them, but has to do with the violation by NATO on what was resolved years ago. Hence, we're calling for everybody to respect the resolutions of the United Nations, but also for the United Nations Security Council to have a say in this regard. And we'll continue actively as a non-aligned party, as a non-aligned country, as a people to call for peace, to call for dialogue.
Here's my issue with this conversation. Let's perhaps drill down to this. Who is South Africa's biggest trading partner right now?
Look, the biggest trading partners of South Africa, it's the EU, the United Kingdom, and the United States of America. Those are the biggest. But again, there is a huge potential amongst the BRICS nations. If they come together, that we can all benefit for all the nations that are part of the BRICS community. So it is not only about the investors. They also stand to benefit as they invest in South Africa. So it's not an act of charity of them coming in and investing in our country.
And so
we need to look at what is of mutual benefit for all of us.
You are willing to compromise South Africa's national interests, a country that is set to grow at a meager 0.2% by the South African Reserve Bank. And you're willing to compromise those trade ties simply because you want to stand up for Russia, whose trade ties with South Africa right now. Do you know where that stands?
No, Koli, I think you're missing a point here. None of us are saying we're doing anything in the interest of a particular relationship. We're doing this in the interest of South Africa itself. Mm-hmm. It does not mean that if you have these bigger countries that are investing on a larger scale in our country, there's no potential in others. But they themselves are beneficiaries. What we do not want to do is to harm our own economy and even undermine the opportunities that may come out of these relationships that we have with Brazil, Russia, and India, and many others who have shown interest to be part of the BRICS. But of importance, we have overemphasized repeatedly, and hence we are saying it's not just about walking out of the ICC, it is about looking at what is good for South Africa without undermining anything that has to do with our own national interest. It is not fair. It is not fair for any self-respecting nation to be told what to do with those that seek to also contribute in our own development. This is not an act of charity. This is about future investment and the growth of our own country. And hence, we remain non-aligned and actively involved in engaging in all multilateral platforms and calling for peace and promoting dialogue more than any other thing.
All right, let's leave the conversation there. Nomvula Mokonyane, the chairperson of the ANC's Subcommittee on International Relations.